Thanks so much for joining us for another Facebook Live with the New York Times. I'm here with my colleague, Nellie Bowles. I'm Katie Benner. I'm a tech reporter here at the Times, and I work with Nellie, who just published a story this weekend called Push for Gender Equality in Tech. Some men say that it's gone too far, a story that addresses the idea that there's a backlash growing against women in tech who have been speaking out about the way they've been treated. So, Nellie, I'm super excited to talk to you about this, and I would love to just begin with you explaining a little bit about the impetus for the story. You know, what led to this piece, and why did you think it was important to write?
Yeah, thanks for having me back on our Facebook Live chats. I liked our last one. Okay, this backlash is happening. The men's rights movement is finding allies here in Silicon Valley. We have to shine a light on that. And that's my job. It's not about like finding the world that I want. As a reporter, I started noticing some of these conversations and some of this backlash, and I started seeing it online. And I thought it was a really important thing to cover.
It's interesting that you say that too, because some of the Times has covered bad behavior in companies, sexist behavior, sexual harassment, and racism in companies, not just in tech companies,
we've both been
for the
doing
last
for
year. Right, and I think that one of the things that often isn't covered is the idea that just because a newspaper has shed light on something, that doesn't mean that it ends, and that there is often a backlash. So here we've seen it in Silicon Valley, and I know that I've had meetings.
You see it with every social movement. You see it with like the Blue Lives Matter as a backlash to Black Lives Matter. Every social movement that's happening right now has sort of different angles to it.
So was there anything in the course of reporting that surprised you?
The depth to it, yeah. When I started, I thought that this was just going to be about people saying the women in tech movement had gone too far, maybe like the lines were getting too ambiguous now about what counted as harassment. And I was going to report on that, on people who that was their takeaway from a lot of this reporting, that this was getting too ambiguous. And what I found was a lot of beliefs that were much further than that and much more radical than that and more extreme. And so what I wanted to try to do was draw a line between how some of the less fringe folks, like, you see Paul Graham, who founded Y Combinator, tweeting in support of James Damore, and how some of the sort of mainstream characters in Silicon Valley are also in a conversation that then at its extremes is a very radical men's rights conversation.
So I think that the inclusion of Paul Graham was really interesting in the story, because you're right, Paul Graham is not a fringe figure. He's a very established person here in the Valley who he creates a lot of the culture that we see in terms of what makes a great company. And I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you have been reading about this movie that's coming out called Battle of the Sexes, about the big tennis match between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs. But what's interesting to me about the movie is that, at least in the fictionalized version, fictionalized Billie Jean King says not to Bobby Riggs, but to a man named Jack Kramer, who basically ran tennis at the time, that he was more of a problem than Bobby Riggs was. Bobby Riggs was this outsized personality, this flagrantly, flamboyantly sexist guy that was really easy for people to punch back against, which in some ways is how people think of a James Damore. Whereas Jack Kramer was the person who made the decision to pay men 10 times more for winning a match than a woman. He was the person making these very, very deep decisions about how women would be treated. And she says, you're the bigger problem. You're the person who is harder to fight. And so I thought that the inclusion of somebody like Paul Graham really spoke to that it's the Paul Grahams of the world who create the culture, who make the justifications, who fund the companies, and who are sort of widely respected, that are the bigger problem than a fringe men rights activist on Reddit.
I mean, it's a big and complicated conversation that's happening. And like, I wouldn't say that he's that he's one of the Redditors, but that this conversation is happening and we need to try to trace it. We need to try to understand it. We need to know who the players are. We need to know its impact. I think that, I got a lot of flack this weekend about how it's giving these guys a platform, or that it's normalizing it. Reporting on what is happening in our world isn't normalizing it. And I think a lot of the quotes in the story are anything but normal. I mean, they're jarring and disturbing. And so I would hope that would be the takeaway, that there are really disturbing conversations happening.
So Nellie, actually would love to talk to you a little bit more about that, but I just want to remind everybody that we're doing a Facebook Live right now. I'm Katie Benner, a tech reporter at the New York Times, and we're here with Nellie Bowles, one of my colleagues who also covers technology and online culture, and that we would really love for you to send in your comments and your questions about the issue of gender and discrimination in technology. Feel free to post them in the comments, and we'll start addressing them. And yes, we have to say this every once in a while so everybody knows what we're doing.
Katie, you're so good at the Facebook Live.
I know if it's actually the reason they keep me around. If I didn't do these Facebook Lives periodically, I would lose my job. Just so you know. So everybody, please comment so that I keep my job. Anyway, thank you again, Nellie. So one of the things that you were talking about was one of the comments that you got was that you felt that this wasn't that what you had intended was to write a story looking at the fact that there's a backlash right now, that men don't want to give up power, that all of the conversations that have been happening around the way that women have been treated have shown a light on bad behavior, but they are pushing back and they don't want things to change. But that this was interpreted.
People in power never want things to change.
Right, right. So I think that's interesting that simply making the statement that people in power don't want things to change was not taken that way by some of the audience who read the story.
Yeah, I think we're living in a really divided, really hot time. There's a lot of anger right now. And it's hard to figure out where to direct that anger. I was surprised by the response, though. I'll be honest. I thought that it would be more focused on the issue and on the reality that I'm trying to expose.
Yeah,
it was fascinating. I mean, I think America right now. I think it's kind of the conversations right now are sort of a mess. Is how I would describe it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a reality whenever we report on issues that touch people's lives really deeply. Yeah. That there should be an expectation that people will, it's a personal issue and that people will want to express the outrage and anger that they feel. So I guess even if it was a surprising reaction, it's one that sort of makes sense in some ways. Here's a question
a lot of people in Silicon Valley feel it really viscerally because for them, it's not a hypothetical. This isn't like, and it's also not a revelation for a lot of folks here. This is a day-to-day lived experience. And so I think for them, they read this and it was like, well, like, obviously we know this already. And I think that there's a lot of emotion that comes with that. And I mean, I feel I live here. I work in reporting on tech. And so, I find this conversation to be jarring, and I found it to be jarring for years.
Sure. And it's interesting that we often forget that these conversations that are happening here aren't visible to the rest of the world. So if you think about Google, Facebook, all these companies that always make the best places to work, every best place to work list, every best benefits in the country list, every, who treats workers the best, tech companies always top those lists. So I do think the public perception broadly of tech is that it's this really wonderful, warm, inclusive place to be. So even though a lot of the things in your story felt like, no, duh, of course this is what men are saying here to a lot of people in the industry, I think for a lot of readers in the country, they are totally unaware of those conversations and backlash are happening because when they think of Google, they think, oh, isn't that the company that won Fortune's Best Places to Work list and has the best maternity benefits and is the most enlightened company in the country? I just want to go over to one of the questions, and this is from somebody named Allie. Okay. I'm sorry. Sorry. Angela was the first question that came up. And she wrote, I find old school policies are causing unfairness in my workplace. What is your advice for identifying and changing changing unhealthy policies? I like the question because it's very proactive. So, Nellie, based on your reporting, what are some things that companies could do to create more gender equity in the workplace? You spoke with Joelle Emerson at Paradigm. You've spoken with a lot of experts. So what are some proactive things that people can do?
I think it has to be built into the company from the ground up. I think it can't just be a sort of diversity weekend workshop or something like that. Joelle Emerson at Paradigm is a great example. She does very intense and sort of comprehensive plans for how companies can become more diverse and can make people who are different within the company feel more welcome there. So I think it's a lot of things. I don't think there's like a silver bullet, but as I'm talking, it's interesting because there are a lot of like very sophisticated and smart things you can do to make your company more welcoming and a better place for women. But a lot of the issues that we're talking about aren't even that sophisticated and complicated. Like what you've been reporting on is just blatant sexual harassment. And a lot of what's happening here is just like, Dick Costello's quote that until friends of his aren't getting ass grabbed in the office, then maybe we can talk about this women in tech movement has gone too far. So I think there needs to be sophisticated responses. I think also a lot of it's real simple.
Mm-hmm. There's an interesting reader or viewer question. I don't even know if it's a question. It's more of a statement by a man named Charles, who wrote, "Don't worry about what your coworkers make. Do you and move on. There, I solved it. But I'm a man who is married to a woman and I'm white, so my opinion doesn't matter." Now, I'm going to put the obvious defensiveness in this statement aside for a second, because I really have a belief that people that nobody would ever speak the way in online in real life the way they speak in online comments. It's my fervent belief. But that aside,
one can hope.
Charles does speak exactly to the issue of your story, which is men saying, women, their complaints have gone too far. They've said too much. This is ridiculous. It's out of control. Just do your work and absolutely move on. I think it's fascinating that this is not just it's not just the people in your story. It's somebody who's watching us right now. And to Charles, I would say, I see what you're saying. And I just want to throw out an example. There have been message boards at Google with people talking about how much money they make. And I have a friend who's there. And one of the things that she noticed is that in some of the surveys, it was revealed that women were making more than men in certain divisions, and that the men were outraged when they found that out. Like a level of outrage. They could not believe this was happening. It was unfair. How can this happen in America? How can this happen in corporate America, where hard work defines your worth and you should be paid equally? Now, I'm not saying that men or women should be paid more. I'm just saying that outrage over being paid not as much money is not something reserved just for women. Nobody really likes it when that happens. So I don't think that the fact that inequity is being treated as a women's issue, I think bothers me, because I think inequity is an issue. It is being directed more toward women statistically, but I think that we also have to think about this as a how do we treat one another issue, not just how do we treat women. Inequity is never good. So, Charles, I would say that your opinion certainly has historically mattered very much and all of the time. But that also, you are the perfect example of this story.
Silence is how inequality is maintained. If people don't know that there's unequal pay scales happening in an office, that's how you keep people who are being paid less happy, because they don't know. Like silence is never going to make a better, more equal workplace.
Yeah. Here's just a comment from Monica. As an African-American woman with 2 degrees in engineering from Stanford University, I am shocked at how hard it is to find a direct technical job in the industry. So this is not, we are not imagining that race and gender have played a role in whether or not you'll succeed in an industry that historically is a big creator of wealth. And so we would want it to be more equitable, certainly. Just a question. And another from Scott. My wife makes more money than me and works from home, but she does not work in tech. I am not outraged. I love it. Scott, that's awesome. We love it.
Thank you, Scott.
But, Scott, a different Scott writes, how do you not get pigeonholed? Is that what seems to happen to women? And I'm wondering, Nellie, in your reporting, did you find this? I remember there was sort of a shocking quote in the story, a man saying that he could understand how a woman would rise to be a manager in certain parts of the company, but if it had if it was really technical, how could it possibly be that a woman would manage that division? There has to be something else going on, because there's no way a woman could do that. Now, I think Scott is asking a similar question. How does a woman avoid being pigeonholed like that?
It was like, if a woman heads up the fashion magazine, no one's eyebrows are going to rise. But if she's heading up autos, then that's a sign of a problem. And that was from the Yahoo lawyer, and I'm sort of paraphrasing his quote, but that was the Yahoo lawyer talking about supposed discrimination at Yahoo against men. Pigeonholing, I mean, obviously that quote and that philosophy is kooky. I think in that case, he's saying that would be okay for only women to be fashion editors and men to be auto editors. I mean, it's just too absurd to even really deal with on a content level. Mm-hmm. But I think what's interesting in there and in that quote is, a lot of people have been writing about that Yahoo lawsuit, and a lot of people kind of take their arguments at face value and don't figure out some of the underlying beliefs. And one of the things that I really wanted to do in the story is talk to people, do long interviews, and try to get to some of the underlying beliefs that are behind this backlash. Because there's that lawsuit. Damore, who wrote the memo, is also engaging a lawyer to do various things, and I talked to her as well. And I think getting at the underlying beliefs behind these legal actions is really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Just a reminder, we're doing a Facebook Live. Nellie Bowles, I'm Katie Benner. We're tech reporters at the New York Times. And Nellie had written a story about a backlash amongst men in Silicon Valley as more women speak out about the fact that they have been mistreated. And there is an interesting comment from a man named Clint who said, "I highly value intelligent women. I have had female supervisors my entire career. They got there by being better, not complaining." And Clint,
this is the whole point.
Right. I find this so interesting because we have no idea whether or not those women complained. We actually don't know what they had to do to get where they were. And I think that for a lot of people, it looks easy. People who are successful do make it look easy. They make it look like they just got there by doing hard work and not by complaining. But I think that a lot of our reporting has shown is that being better for a woman involves a lot more than just doing a good job, because you're proving yourself in so many ways. As Fiona just wrote, it's common for people to think this woman is bad at her job, so all women cannot do this job. But they also think this man can't do this job, so he is bad at his job. Very, very often women and people of color are representing a much broader group of people. And so their successes and failures have an outsized impact. Whereas men are given the benefit of the doubt. You're allowed to not do a good job as a man without bringing down all men. So Clint,
in the story.
Yeah. I was going to say, it might look like your female supervisors, it was easy for them and they just did it by being better and not complaining. But we actually do not know what their lives were like and how they got to where they were.
And in the story, there's a Silicon Valley VC talking about how he's upset that Google fired Damore, and he says, please stop teaching my daughter that the path to success is in complaining to HR. I think this word complaining and the idea that being upset over inequality is a complaint is really interesting to me. I think it's a word that's demeaning to the act of being angry over injustice. But I hear it a lot. I know you probably heard it a lot,
sure,
too, from folks talking about your reporting here when you're out and about. It's this idea that people are complaining and they should just focus and just work and just do the work. And of course, we should all focus and do the work. But I think speaking out is not complaining.
Sure.
That's what I would say,
and
Scott.
Taking into account the fact that there are outside factors that determine success that have nothing to do with one's hard work, I don't think that's complaining. I think that's fine. Nellie, was there anything else about the story that you think is important for people to understand? And I think it's interesting to go back to this idea that people felt like you were giving people a platform rather than reporting what is happening in Silicon Valley. So is there anything else about the story that you found interesting that you would want to highlight, that you think that you would even want to explore more in a future story?
I want to explore it all more. I want to explore MGTOW more, the sort of radical male separatists.
Can you explain what MGTOW is?
I just light on all of it. Like
for people who didn't read the story, can you explain what MGTOW is? Because I found this to be one of the more mystifying things I've heard.
It's like lesbian separatism without the sex. MGTOW is is men going their own way. It's a radical, sexist, male, separatist culture that wants to, basically they've decided that it is too dangerous to interact with women in the world, that any interaction you do, you make yourself vulnerable to lawsuits, so you should just avoid women altogether. And it's, I kind of am laughing, and it's kind of a funny thing, but it's also like not funny. And in some of the comments to my story, I heard from women who had been harassed by this group, and it's a very real group with very real consequences. They haven't really been covered and reported on. I find them really interesting. I want to understand why they have their beliefs and how impactful they are. If we want a better world, if we want change, we have to figure out what the impediments to progress are and understand it and really wrestle with it.
Yeah, and
that's what I want to
do. Even just a couple of years ago, they would have seemed absolutely absurd, but now we have a vice president who feels very much the same way and has vocalized it. And he doesn't want to be alone with women either. So I think this idea that women are dangerous
totally right.
is certainly not new. And it's something that's gotten a lot more traction in the last, I would say even in the last year and a half, between the election cycle and then the actual administration's actions. Yeah. This is interesting from Allie Page, saying that what we're talking about, gender inequity and sexism in tech, it's a societal issue, not a tech issue. And she writes, the larger question for me is, how do women take back their power as equal members of society? And what will it take for men to allow that? And, Nellie's story was very much about the fact that men do not, or some men do not want to allow this. So Nellie, I think we're running out of time. So yeah, how would you respond?
I would say people in power. I would say that it applies to race issues. I would say it applies to gender issues. I would say it applies to sexual orientation issues. People in power don't want to give up power. An interesting part of that is it's a societal issue, not a tech issue. That is interesting because, completely accurate. I would argue that the modern men's rights movement is very much being incubated in Silicon Valley, in the tech world. I think the leaders of the modern men's rights movement, the sort of intellectual leaders, the cultural leaders, are coming from this world. And we saw it rise with Gamergate, and since then. I would say that Silicon Valley is playing a very big part in what we're seing now.
Sure.
Would be my only add to that.
And I think that by taking community away from location, we've allowed for certain forces to rise again that weren't able to before. So what I mean by that is when community meant the physical people around us, there were norms and mores that were inviolable for a long time. You couldn't be openly racist. You couldn't be openly anti-Semitic. You really, with some exceptions, it was looked down upon to be openly sexist. But we've taken community and put it online. So now people who have what would have been considered fringe, inappropriate, illegal, awful ideas have been able to come together and reconfigure in such a way that they become a large community. They're no longer on the fringe, no longer in the shadows. And that was technologically enabled. And I think that the companies themselves have not yet reckoned with what that means and what they've done. So it sounds like we are out of time. We're getting the cue that was a great question to end on. So Nellie, unless there's anything else you'd love to add, I know we're getting these subtle messages.
This is fantastic. I want to stay here for an hour and just answer every question and go on little rants and tangents. But no, this was a pleasure. And for those watching, send more questions my way. My email address is nellie.bowles@nytimes.com. I am all ears. And I'm really interested in having this debate. So
great.
Keep them coming.
Thanks so much. I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.